Welcome to the AICPA Town Hall Series, your resource for the latest news and updates on pressing issues facing the accounting profession.
Good afternoon and welcome to the AICPA Town Hall Series. I'm Eric Auskerson, one of your hosts for today. We've got a great program planned for you. Hope you're all having a good summer, and let's get into it because we've got a lot of topics that we're going to cover. We're going to kick things off with a DC and profession update from Rachel Dresden. We then are going to have a very provocative discussion on some real drivers of the changing demographic makeup of the United States. And there's some real, business things that you need to take into account due to these demographic changes. And that will be with Dr. Jim Johnson. Lisa's then going to join us for a technical update section, and she's also going to lead a discussion with our AM partners related to best practices around professional liability. So let's kick things off with the DC and profession update. Welcome, Rachel. Rachel's in our DC office. She's a senior director there, leading advocacy for us, and it's been a busy summer. It's been a busy 2023, Rachel. So here's a topic that we've been discussing over the last few town halls. There's a lot of questions out there and there's a lot of interest. And I know our advocacy team had a recent meeting with FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes and Enforcement Network under Treasury, about the beneficial ownership information requirement that's coming out. So why don't you summarize the latest on this, and welcome, Rachel.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, it has been a busy summer, and as you mentioned, we recently met with Treasury on this beneficial ownership information issue. We've talked a lot about it on this town hall. We've gotten a lot of questions about it. We know it's something that it's on a lot of practitioners' minds. In this meeting that we had with FinCEN, we asked them about just the status of informing the public and small businesses on this reporting requirement that's going to go into effect at the beginning of next year. And they let us know that they plan to come out with a compliance guide and some FAQs, and the FAQs will include some complicated scenarios as well as a toolkit and a press kit. So that's something to watch out for in the next few weeks or so, that they will be releasing some of that information. We also raised the issue of the unauthorized practice of law. This is something that we've talked about here on this town hall. As a reminder, it's basically the practice of law when you're not a lawyer or you're not licensed, and every state has their own specific interpretation of that. And so we raised this issue with them and some of the liability issues that practitioners could run into as they're helping their clients to comply with the beneficial ownership reporting requirement. And what we heard back from Treasury was that they think that, practitioners should consult their individual state authorities on this. We let them know that this was an important issue, and we also implored very strongly to them that in the FAQs that they provide some really specific information to address the unauthorized practice of law issue. And also on the legislation that's been introduced that would delay the reporting requirement from going into effect on January 1, it would delay it until later. We asked them if they had any thoughts or any comments on that. They didn't have anything to share with us on a delay, but they are just planning to move forward with that January 1st implementation. So that's a little bit about the recent meeting that we had with them on the BOI issue. And we know that this is something that, we get a lot of questions about from the town hall community, and we'll continue to keep you informed as we get more information.
Yeah, so two things. We'll continue to work on resources, and we'll give you our best available information related to when implementation will occur. Right now, still moving forward with that assumption, as you said, that'll start on January 1st, 2024. Quick question here. will NFBs be required to file BOI information, not-for-profits?
Not-for-profits. That's a great question. I don't believe so, but let me get some clarification on that. I don't want to steer you wrong here, but I do not believe that it includes not-for-profits.
So maybe we can put that in the newsletter follow-up, or maybe get the answer by open forum. So moving on, Congress is in recess, and as you predicted, I think at the start of July or late June, you thought there would be little movement related to these appropriation bills, and that seems to have occurred. It's a little bit of an eye chart, but if you read this article here, only 1 of 12 of the appropriation bills moved forward. So what's the latest? And this wasn't a surprise to you, obviously.
Yeah, they had a very ambitious agenda for the month of July. They had all the 12 appropriations bills that they wanted to get to, as well as some other issues like the National Defense Authorization Act. Senate Leader Schumer had also mentioned some other bills related to cannabis or executive clawbacks. Really, they weren't able to do much other than the National Defense Authorization Act. And then as far as appropriations, as you mentioned, the House passed 1 of the 12. The Senate did not pass any of the 12 bills to fund the government. So when they come back in September, that is going to be a focus of what they will be working on. Otherwise, if we hit October 1, of course, as everyone knows, we could have a government shutdown if those 12 bills aren't passed, or a continuing resolution, which would continue to fund the government until a specific date that CR, continuing resolution would state. At this time, it's really unknown whether or not they will be able to pass this CR. It's very, very, very unlikely they'll pass all 12 appropriations bills in just the few weeks that they will be in town in September. As a reminder, it's been decades since they've passed all 12 approps bills, and trying to do it in just a few weeks is not going to happen, quite frankly. So we could be looking at a government shutdown. There are some questions, though, about how a government shutdown would impact the IRS. As we've talked about before, the Inflation Reduction Act, it gave the IRS $80 billion. Of course, the debt limit deal clawed some of that money back, but they still have a bunch of that money that they could potentially use in the case of a shutdown. They will come out with a contingency plan sometime in September, just laying out how they will operate should there be a government shutdown. And so right now it's unclear whether or not they'll use some of that money from the Inflation Reduction Act to continue to operate if there is a shutdown.
Thanks, Rachel. So there's always questions coming in about Section 174. I mean, clearly there was not a vehicle to attach that to this summer. So now, we'll move to the fall to see if there can be a vehicle to attach that to.
Yes, yeah, that was one of the bills that, some were hopeful that would get passed in July, and they weren't able to pass that bill. So it's something that, there could be legislation in the fall, and we'll continue to push for that, for them to do something on 174, as well as 1099-K and some of the other tax issues.
Okay, well, thank you. So coming up later this month, August 23rd, we're basically kicking off the 2024 presidential race with the first Republican debate. So I guess there's 8 candidates qualified, and we're all hearing that one of the 8 may not show up.
That's right. Yeah. So this is, as Congress is in recess right now, this is the big topic here in D.C. is in less than 2 weeks, there is, as you said, the first Republican debate. And right now, it's unclear whether or not former President Trump will show up for debate. There are, reasons on both sides of the argument on whether or not he should or shouldn't show up. There could be more than 8 candidates who make the debate stage. As you recall, back in 2016, they had so many candidates, they had 2 debate stages. They had a pre-debate and then they had the primetime debate. What the Republicans did this time is they have some requirements in order to make the debate stage, in order to limit the number of individuals so they don't have to do 2 debates each night again. Some of those requirements have gotten some attention. One of the requirements is that you have to have 40,000 unique donors. And so there have been some of these candidates who have found some creative ways to get these 40,000 donors by actually losing money. They have, there's a candidate who has offered a $20 gift card if you just give $1, or, sending you a t-shirt if you just give $1. So of course, losing money there. So we could see more than the 8 candidates that you see here on this screen if others meet the requirements for the debate. Another requirement that's gotten some interest is a pledge that if you are not the nominee, you will still support and endorse whoever is the nominee. At this point, only one, Vivek Ramaswamy, is the only individual who has signed that pledge. There is some thought that the others will wait until they're at the debate in Milwaukee on the 23rd to actually sign it. But that's something that's gotten a lot of media attention, is whether or not these individuals will be willing to sign that. As well as you mentioned, the big question is, will the former president actually show up in less than 2 weeks? He has said that he'll make a decision sometime next week and announce whether or not he'll be there.
Well, thanks, Rachel. One, on the point about the gift cards, it's interesting. That was Doug Burgum, who's the governor of North Dakota. And actually, I think many people might know the company that he founded that are on this call. He founded Great Plains, or he was part of the founding team of Great Plains Software, built that up. Great Plains then was purchased by Microsoft in early 2000, and Doug moved. Doug worked for Microsoft for a number of years before he went to elected office. So he's the one who put the $20 out gift card for the $1 donation. Well, thanks, Rachel, and we'll have you back during open forum. Now we're going to move to this session on major demographic trends. I'd like to welcome Dr. Jim Johnson. It's a pleasure being with you. I've been fortunate to be with the professor on many occasions, and actually he's going to be coming to Digital CPA this year. And what we're doing on today's town hall is just kind of highlighting some of his research, which is very important from a business standpoint. And the white paper that you wrote a while back that kind of helps drive a lot of these slides, you stated that, gale force demographic wind gusts ahead, business alert. I'm a sailor, and when gale force winds are ahead, you definitely need to get prepared. So right. Thanks for being here today, and looking forward to this session.
Thank you so much, Eric, for having me. When you're on that sailboat, given the disruptive trends we find ourselves in the midst of, buckle your seatbelt, because that is what you need to do in the world of business, given the kinds of disruptive demographic changes we find ourselves in the midst of. If we can move forward on the slides.
And we might say batten down your hatches.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When we were on lockdown, the Census Bureau released 2 important sources of information. They released the 2020 census. Every 10 years, we do a full enumeration account for our population. They released that. And then most recently, they released post-2020 population estimates for the first 27 months of the new decade. That's the first 27 months that we lived through a pandemic. And you asked the question, how did we behave during the pandemic? I've taken those 7 forces and reduced them to 3 buckets. I'm going to get through them pretty quickly. During the pandemic, our population was moving and grooving. It was browning and graying, and it was disappearing and rebelling. If we move to the next slide, that Moving and Grooving was about the profound redistribution of our population during the pandemic. Everybody thought we were at home on lockdown. In reality, we were a very highly mobile population, and the bottom line was that the South grew by 2.5 million people during the first 27 months of the pandemic. That is the continuation of a trend that actually started in the late 1970s, profound redistribution of population from the Northeast and the Midwest to the South. The West grew a little bit, but it was all because of an increase of births over deaths. The West was a net exporter out as well. If we have the next slide, what you will see is how many people were engaged in this process. Florida got 985 people every day, 7 days a week for the first 27 months of this decade. Texas got 789 people every day. North Carolina, here where I live, we got 307 people every day. If you go down that list, this movement was about North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Florida, Georgia, and Tennessee in the South, and Arizona in the west part of the region. Where were the people coming from? California lost about 860 odd people every day. New York lost 687 people every day. Illinois, 294 people every day. You go down the list, a profound kind of redistribution of population that had both good things and bad things with it. The good part was, the movement to the South and other regions brought, enormous economic growth and development to those regions, but it also created a huge housing affordability crisis for us, that many people got priced out of the housing market. And many of them work for us every day that cannot no longer afford to live in the places that they work. Here where we are in Durham, North Carolina, I have a school for vulnerable children. I had 4 homeless teachers, all with master's degrees, but they can't afford to live in the city because the price of housing has become so outrageous in the place. And so we have some both good things, strong economic benefits for this, but also we have to look after the very people who are hired to protect public health and safety and educate our kids, school teachers, police officers, EMS workers, and the like that are getting priced out of these markets. The next slide.
Jim, just before we move to the next slide, because I've heard you provide these presentations even before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the data, it's staggering. As you said, the growth in Florida, Texas, North Carolina, and Arizona, and then the shrinking of California, New York, and Illinois. Did this accelerate a lot during the pandemic, compared to prior to the pandemic?
Very good question, Eric. So I'll just use North Carolina. For the past decade prior to the pandemic, North Carolina got about 150 people every day. During the pandemic, it went to 307 people every day, to give you some sense of the magnitude of the change.
Wow.
At the same time that we had this profound redistribution of population, we had a change in the composition of the population, what I call the browning of America. And that's all about immigration-driven population change. But there was a profound, unprecedented shift in our population in the previous decade that is undergirding this browning of America. And that unprecedented change was a 5.1 million decline in the non-Hispanic white population. So we grew by 22.7 million people during the last decade. All of that growth was due to people of color. And during the pandemic, as you can see in this slide, the non-Hispanic white population dropped by another 1.6 million people. So if we added 1.8 million people to our population, all of it was driven by people of color, particularly Hispanics, but particularly people of Asian descent, and particularly people of mixed race categories, because we've also seen this increase in outmarriage or intermarriage that is transforming the complexion of our society. So your workforce is going to be far more diverse moving forward, given these kinds of profound changes in the composition of our population. Next slide. And we're also aging at the same time. That's the graying piece. Now, you might ask, well, how do you know if you're part of the graying of America? Well, if you have difficulty seeing this screen, you're part of the graying of America. And so if you got to go to the restroom 3 times during this presentation, you're part of the graying of America. But the graying of America is about the aging of a group of us who were born between 1946 and 1964. We're the boomer generation. On January 1st of 2011, the first baby boomer turned 65 and became eligible for basically everything. But every day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, between 2011 and 2029, we boomers are turning 65 at the rate of 10,000 per day. That's the silver tsunami. That's the huge wave of people who will be exiting the labor market. You can see the impact in the graphic here of the first 27 months of the new decade, where the most rapidly growing population was the 65 plus population, going at 5.9%. You see a loss in the 18 to 64 age category and a loss among the under 18, because part of what graying is driving graying is declining fertility. We've had the below replacement level fertility in America since 2008. And so when you're not adding on the front end of the life course, the top end of the life course gets older, and we have extended longevity because that person turning 65 today is going to live another 18.7 years. We don't die, we just multiply. Next slide. And we also are seeing a profound shift in the composition of higher education. The sex ratio in higher education has been 60% female, 40% male for about 3 decades now. And you see the history of it and how it develops in the left-hand side of this graphic. We granted something like 59,000 more degrees to women than we did men in the UNC system in the last 5 years. It's this profound shift that is going to be manifested in the workforce moving forward. It is going to be far more women in the workforce than men, because we have a whole generation of men that have given up on college and just not attending. They are not even engaged in the academic process, and it has enormous implications for us moving forward. But this sex ratio imbalance has implications for marriage. It has implications for dual learner households. There are a whole range of implications there that we don't have time to get into today, but that is a major kind of disruptive trend. Next slide.
Jim, I got a couple questions I'm going to just bring to you.
Sure.
One is on the declining white population, the drivers there, and then also the influence of just retirees to the growth in the South.
Yeah. So we have I was going to talk about it a little bit, but I'll just mention it now. There is this profound growth and increase in deaths of despair among prime working age males that are with less than a college education. And it's having a profound impact in our society. And at the same time, you have sort of inequities, health inequities that are snuffing out the life of certain individuals, or these premature deaths, and the normal aging process of normal aging leading to death. All of those things are coming together. The boomer population is 70% white. So you're going to get those deaths in that group. Whereas, the Gen Z is about 48% non-white. And so we find ourselves in this situation where there are these gale force demographic wind gusts that we have to deal with. I'll run through them really quickly. We're in an era of slowing total growth, slowing foreign population growth, that white population decline that I've just talked about. We have declining fertility worldwide, and these deaths of despair. And all of that translates to the declining labor force participation in our economy. And you'll see it in the next slide, in the next couple of slides. If you look at the left-hand side of this graphic, what you will see is that in the last decade, we had the second slowest rate of growth in the history of our country, where we grew by 7.4%. The slowest rate of growth was in the 1940s during the Great Depression, where we grew by 7.3%. Our growth rate peaked in 1960, and it has been declining ever since. And you'll look at the right-hand side of this graphic, where it is forecast that we will continue to experiencing slow population growth moving forward. Next slide. And you see it in the labor market today. And this is why we have such huge challenges. You see those red bars, both in terms of the composition of the population and the workforce. The young population is declining. The most rapidly growing age groups in our workforce are the 55 or older population. We have a serious cliff coming to us in terms of the people who have to propel our nation moving forward because of declining fertility and because of these deaths of despair and things of that nature. If you think we have labor force challenges now, you haven't seen anything. It's just the beginning of a real challenge moving forward. Because we're losing so many prime working age young people, and we just had declining fertility. Next slide.
And just on a couple of questions on deaths of despair, and I've seen more of your slides, and that's due to some of the overdoses,
yeah,
suicide.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, with all of these big developments, how do you win the war on talent? Well, there's some recruitment strategies I think you have to pursue. One, I think in this climate and given the disruptive demographic changes, you're going to have to grow your own pipeline. You're going to have to figure out how do you develop relationships with people at a very, very young age and nurture and grow them all the way to your organizations, your firms. And I think you got to look for talent in places that no one else is looking for it. And I think these encore career strategies are important. We have this large boomer population, a lot of people who thought they were going to play golf every day, and now they're bored as bat doo-doo. They want back into the workforce, and we need them given the kinds of changes that we find ourselves in. So this notion of encore careers is very, very important. And in places and markets where you have major labor challenges, you got to have place-based incentives to encourage people to come there and to work for you. That's recruitment. The next slide is how do you retain the workforce that you have? I think in this climate, we talk a lot about iceberg demographics, not about what you see. The iceberg, the 30% that you see would be the equivalent of race and gender and things of that nature. But it's all the things that you don't see that are critical to creating a highly attractive workforce where everybody feels like they belong, and looking for all of the ties that bind us together. You wouldn't know that I lost 10 family members in the last decade just looking at me. That's an iceberg consideration. And I guarantee you there are people on this, town hall that have lost loved ones and the like, and so looking for these communalities, these ties that bind is going to be crucial moving forward. And you got to recognize that retirement is outdated because people are living much longer. So the notion of the retirement age is going to change. So you have to develop a longevity mindset in this process, creating rotational programs for older workers. And 75 to 80% of women at work today are menopausal. Those are kinds of changes that require workers, if you're going to retain women, to be menopausal friendly. That's a big thing moving forward, particularly given the gender shifts in the workplace. Next slide.
Well, I think that brings us to the end here of your section. So just fantastic. I mean, I know the audience just loved this summary. I mean, I've been with you on a number of occasions. You usually are with us for an hour, and what you just did in 12 minutes for us was fantastic. Sure. Comments here, just a couple, immigration policy, technology, just hit those two, and then we'll wrap up.
We have to realize that, Eric, as you well know, that immigration is an age-selective process. Far more young people immigrate and migrate than older people. That means old people don't move, they move slower and at a lower propensity than young people. And there's one more piece to this story that's very, very important for our future. I don't want to repeat this anywhere, but young people are more likely to have children than old folks. And so the challenge for us and the opportunity that we have is to come up with a sane immigration policy that will allow us to embrace the talent, because it's an age selective process. Immigrants are far more entrepreneurial than we are. And so we benefit, our nation has benefited. We were built on that pillar. And so we need to have these conversations. We need to be promoting immigration friendly policies, including place-based visas for communities that aren't growing rapidly at present time.
And then AI, that's something we'll be talking a lot about at Digital CPA, just technology, automation. But one thing we see is everyone, the technology will help with productivity, but it's probably going to just produce, more opportunities and more work. But it will be a way to augment, lack of staff in some areas.
Yeah, that's part of the problem that we have, Eric, is with AI and when people, if you displace a lot of workers, who's going to buy your goods and services?
Mm-hmm.
So when you start thinking about AI, we got to talk about socially responsible AI in a way that we have a workforce that gets paid every day and has a discretionary income to go for a ride with you on your boat.
All right, so we'll the rides in the boat are free, but we will.
They got to get there.
That's right. Thank you very much for that session today, and look forward to having you with us at Digital CPA. And we've probably got 100 questions that came in today. We'll take a look at those. And as I said, we leverage our newsletter, and we'll also leverage these for our follow-up session in December.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So with that, I'd like to bring Lisa Simpson up. Hey, Lisa.
Hey, Eric. That was an interesting conversation. I'm not sure I've seen one topic generate as many comments in the Q&A as that segment just did. So a lot to absorb there. Great slides. So make sure you download the slides and you can refer back to them at a later date. And join us at Digital CPA in December, because Dr. Johnson, when you give him a full hour, he's going to give you even more good insights. So Eric, when we last met, there was a Ways and Means hearing going on related to one of our favorite topics, employee retention credit. So I actually have a clip that we want to play from that July 27th hearing to kind of set up the next portion of my technical update.
I'm the son of a CPA. I worked for him summers. There are practitioners giving up, saying they're done, that if they're going to lose to these corrupt mills, why not join them? And I know there's bad actors in every industry, but every accountant I worked with, no, I was pretty confident that they were straight shooters. How can we find a way to help you and your franchisees, in this case, bring people back into compliance?
Well, we need real-world solutions.
So real-world solutions, and I'll talk about that on the next slide, Eric.
Well, it's nice that we're bringing video to the town halls. That worked. So.
And it worked, yay.
I know that our DC advocacy team, worked hard in their discussions with the elected officials. Great to see that support from that individual.
Absolutely. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes from an advocacy standpoint, and we got to see a lot of that play out in that hearing. So speaking of that hearing, today we're actually submitting written follow-up testimony, and I think I've got that pulled up on, yeah, there we go. And the last segment of that clip that we played mentioned real-world solutions. So within that advocacy testimony that we're submitting, we're talking about some of those real-world recommendations. And just before the town hall, or actually I think it was in the Q&A, we got a comment from an attendee who said that one of their clients had been fallen victim to one of these aggressive mills. Now they're getting audited. So what's going to happen? One of the solutions that we're proposing that the IRS consider, and we'd really like for them to make some movement on, is providing relief from, let's say, penalties and interest if a taxpayer self-corrects and files an amended 941X and returns any ERC that they got that probably they didn't qualify for. So that's one example of a real world solution that we're advocating for. Also asking the IRS to consider how to implement penalty relief for reasonable cause. So again, we know that some of your clients went out and took some of this advice from the aggressive ERC mills and got an ERC refund, didn't qualify, and now you're finding out about it. So if that comes under audit, is there some, again, reasonable cause relief that the IRS could consider on a one-off, on a one-by-one basis, not just a blanket forgiveness of employers who have taken aggressive ERC positions, but what could that possibly look like? We have an entire library of ERC resources that I always want to make sure we remind you about. So that's our ERC update, but the IRS also issued a ruling this week on proof of stake validation rewards. So if you're like me, you read that headline, you read it a couple of times, and you're like, what does that mean? So basically, this is about a nuanced area of the taxation of digital assets and cryptocurrency staking. So the ruling is pretty technical, and if you've got clients who are performing these staking operations, that just means that they are getting rewarded for validating new blocks of transactions on in the blockchain. So this tells us how to actually determine the taxability of that. It's based on fair market value, and it's at the time of the reward. And this applies to cash method taxpayers. So we have a Journal of Accountancy article if you want to dig into that a little bit. But I also just want to reassure you that we've got our eye on all of the digital asset updates that are going on. We're going to bring you a full update in the fall, but just wanted to make sure that this was on your radar. Our task force that's working on a lot of these digital assets issues is actually pretty pleased that we were able to get this guidance from the IRS. That's one of the things we've been pushing for quite some time. So seeing some progress there in terms of the IRS issuing that guidance. Some other good news is that the IRS announced that they are moving ahead with their paperless processing initiative as part of their strategic operating plan. They are saying that their first phase, which will be in place by filing season 2024, which seems pretty aggressive, is that taxpayers will be able to submit digitally all correspondence, non-tax forms, and responses to notices. So from our perspective, this is pretty significant because there are a lot of non-tax forms, a lot of correspondence that is really important, and the ability to have that submitted digitally should make everything faster to process. It should reduce errors. And in the second phase, the IRS is going to move toward digitizing documents that are submitted by paper. They don't expect to have that all completed in 2025, but their goal is to have half of the paper that's submitted in 2025 digitized. Again, all of this should help with client service, your customer service, and increase the efficiency and the accuracy. So we view this as being good news. We'll continue to keep it on our radar, though. And just as a last reminder in our technical update, the Reimagining Your Tax Practice series is ongoing. And on the next slide, I've got a link for you you can sign up for the whole series, which is taking place on the third Wednesday of each month. And I really wanted to call out this next topic. It's intentionally working less hours. How do you actually accomplish this? There was a great podcast that just came out on this topic as well with two small firm tax practitioners who dramatically reduced their hours in busy season 2023 and are looking to even reduce their hours more in 2024. So I know that you're going to get some great practical tips on that between this series and then the podcast that just came out. And we'll get you a link to that podcast in the newsletter, so you've got that available to you. All right, so from a technical update, we'll move from our tax topics into a recurring segment that we have related to professional liability risk management. One of the cool things that I get to do in my role is liaise with the AICPA's Professional Liability Insurance Program. Another great acronym for you is PLIP. So we are joined today by Stan Sterna and Sarah Ferentz. Stan and Sarah are engaged with the AICPA's member insurance program on a daily basis. They've been on town hall with us before, so this is part of a recurring segment that we will use to talk about some risk management practices. So Stan, Sarah, so glad you could join me today.
Thanks so much for having us back.
All right, so let's get started with the 5 pillars, if you will, of professional liability risk management practices, and you've laid them out for us. We've already talked about engagement letters and client and acceptance and continuance. So if you did not catch those, or if you want to get a good refresher before busy season starts, grab those on-demand sessions. But today we're going to talk about communication. So, Sarah, you've given us, we all know that communication is important from a customer service standpoint, for client service, but how does communication tie into mitigating professional liability risk?
Yeah, I mean, communication is something that, of course, is important to us as client service practitioners. But some of the things that can come up that if you were to have communicated clearly with your client, maybe more timely, that could help actually maybe avoid a claim issue altogether. Sometimes the decision that is made by the practitioner and without involving the client, maybe that decision goes a little sideways or doesn't result in the appropriate outcome or the anticipated outcome, and the client might blame the CPA for that. So when you're involving the client in the decision-making process, it generally results in a better way to manage risk. Other ways, we've talked about the importance of scope management and managing client expectations through the engagement letter process, but you can also do it through some clear and timely communications as well. And then, well, no one likes to have conversations or communications that address issues that you found or are having, or challenges that you're having with the client. If you don't address them timely, if you don't address them head on, sometimes they generally don't get better with time. So those are just a couple of ways that we can help mitigate professional liability risk through communication. Stan, what do you think?
Yeah, a lot of professional liability claims, Lisa, hinge on raw emotions. The client may not understand or disagrees with regard to the scope, the expectations, their responsibilities under the engagement. And, this is sometimes is allowed to fester if it's not addressed, and it results in a claim. So constant and open communication, not only at the onset of the engagement, but throughout the entire engagement, will ensure that you can anticipate an issue, understand what the issue is, and then diffuse the issue. Talk to the client about, what is the particular disagreement that they're having or misunderstanding that they're having. You may find out that there's a service issue with maybe a member of the engagement team that you need to address. It may be a situation where they're not paying bills on time because of a temporary financial difficulty that they're involved in, and you can revise your payment schedule. So you can really ward off a pretty nasty claim, and these emotional-based claims, they're very costly to defend, and they're very difficult to resolve. So you can kind of ward that off by just having this constant communication, touching base with your client.
Even if that conversation is difficult, it's still better to have it than, to use your words, let it get old and stale.
Yeah,
so let's talk some.
You'd rather have it now than be deposed later and have to explain it.
Yes.
Depositions do not sound like any fun. I'm good avoiding those. All right, so let's put this into practice. Let's start with some specific tax examples where there might be a need to, have have really clear documented communications. I think you outlined a few of those on the next slide for us.
Sure. So yeah, so I think, as we approach September 15th and October 15th coming up, communicating deadlines to our clients, not only the fact that they have a approaching filing deadline, but what's your deadline for them? When do they need to give you their information? And hopefully that deadline has already been set and they've already given you all their stuff. But communicating deadlines, but then also the consequences if those deadlines aren't met by the client. That you might not be able to prepare their return. Therefore their return might not get filed on time, and therefore they might, be assessed penalties and interest. So kind of communicating the deadline and the consequences of not getting it. I kind of call it the toddler conversation because you always want to communicate consequences to them. Then you want to talk about communicating any questions you have if their information is incomplete, or if it's missing something, or if something is inconsistent. So you want to make sure you have a timely communication with your client on that one. Other things that are important to timely address, things that might result in additional fees. Maybe there's an additional state that needs to be filed. Maybe their information was in such a disarray that you had to spend more time kind of going through it and trying to figure everything out. And that extra time leads to extra fees. No client wants to get a bill at the end of the engagement with more fees than they were anticipating. And if you address that issue head on with timely communication, it generally results in a more satisfactory outcome. Other things, errors noted on previously filed returns. Well, there's actually required communication in the SSTSs and Circular 230 for that. And then I'm going to pause on the option for positions to be taken on returns because I'm going to use that one in an example later on.
Okay. So let's move on and let's talk about audit services. What are some of the topics that you're going to want to address with your audit clients?
Sure. A lot of them are the same. Deadlines, extra fees, circumstances that are going to lead to extra fees, missing or incomplete information, those PBC lists. I know when I was in practice as an auditor, I would never get all of my PBCs on the first day that I arrived, and communicating those missing items as well. But other things like testing errors or control weaknesses, and Stan's going to talk later about some specifics regarding anti-fraud controls, and why that's such an especially important communication for auditors to have with their clients.
Okay. And if we move on into advisory services, because that's another common area for our firms to be in, what are some of your suggestions there?
Yeah, advisory services, especially those related to client accounting services, you're probably communicating with your client on a near daily basis. So you're always going to have back and forth in that kind of service. But some of those things also, again, see some commonalities, some changes in scope, things that are going to lead to additional fees. Those might be same for other services, but here they take on a little bit more importance, especially as it relates to things like decisions that need to be made by the client. As an advisor, you're providing advice and recommendations for your client to do and make decisions related to your recommendations. But that means that the client needs to be involved in that decision-making process, and it's up to you to facilitate that process through communication. Other things that are important with advisory services in particular relate to scope management. One of the beauties of the SSCSs is that they can be almost anything as long as it's related to providing advice and recommendations. And the scope of an engagement is determined through agreement between the CPA and the client. But that means you have to manage that scope. And then oftentimes in an advisory engagement, you're going to identify things that come up that you want to add on or change in the engagement. And then, and you need to do that through some agreed upon communication method with them. So those are some of the things that I would say from an advisory services perspective that help us manage risk.
Okay. And let's talk about specific examples, because I think for me, those are always really eye-opening when I have the conversations with you two. You go through some of the examples and they just kind of catch me. So
Yeah, and you teed us up nicely when you talked about ERC earlier, because that is a decision. That's a communication that practitioners are having every day with their clients, and those are difficult conversations because there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, there's a lot that's still to be determined. There's a lot of things that we can't anticipate in terms of what the IRS may or may not do. But yet we still have upcoming deadlines that are approaching, and decisions need to be made. And one of the best ways that you can help manage your risk related to ERC and a client who may have received an ERC claim that maybe they shouldn't have received, but you don't want to be blamed for that should the IRS come back and audit them and take it away. So the best thing you do to help manage your risk here is to communicate. What do you communicate? Well, a lot of it's, if there's options available to be taken on the return, if maybe there's, if they perhaps maybe their work qualification was questionable, but maybe acceptable, the client needs to understand that if, by reflecting this on their return, this is the risk that they run. They need to understand that the IRS may audit them, that the IRS may not agree with that position, and that if the IRS doesn't agree, they're going to be assessed, additional tax, interest, penalties, and it's the client's responsibility to pay those items if they are. And your job as a practitioner is to provide the client with the decisions available to them, with the benefits and risks of each decision or each option, and then make the client decide. And if the client is involved in that decision-making process, then if the outcome of that decision is not what they wanted, then it does shift some of the blame from you, back to the client, because they're the ones that ultimately made the decision. You just helped give them the information they needed to do so. But remember, ultimately, it's the client's return, and they need to have some sort of accountability and accept their responsibility for the information that's in it.
And Stan, from an audit standpoint, control weaknesses, other areas, what are you thinking?
Yeah, a common claim scenario that we see is a failure to communicate what would be perceived as red flags and internal control weaknesses. And I'll give you an example. You're engaged to do an audit for several years. During the course of the engagement, an employee steals a large sum of money by writing fictitious checks to a fictitious vendor and then depositing those checks into an account that they control. There were no segregation of duties with regard to check writing functions, vendor payment approval, authorization, things of that nature. They were obvious. They were red flags. They were there. It wasn't communicated to the client. The client then eventually sues the CPA firm, the audit firm, claiming you should have alerted us to these red flags and that there was a segregation issue, that we didn't have one. And that as a result, we're seeking damages, not only to stolen funds, but we're looking for lost value in our business because of the embezzlement, and could be substantial additional professional fees investigating the fraud. And so, what you need to do in a situation like that is, I think a lot of auditors might think, well, I have an engagement letter, a well-crafted engagement letter, a disclaimer that, I'm not going to detect every evidence of fraud. That's good to have that in there, but plaintiffs' attorneys, claimants will often hone in on these red flags. And, we have to defend these cases, but they'll say, well, regardless of what was in the engagement letter, there were some obvious red flags here that you should have alerted us to. And that's how they get around the engagement letter provision. So what do we recommend you do if you see these red flags? Obviously communicate them, escalate them to the client, stick to facts, tell them, you have an issue here with the lack of segregation of cash functions and check writing functions at your company. Tell them the risk that may arise. Well, you're susceptible to potential embezzlement, potential fraud, and give them some recommendations. The recommendations could be obvious. Develop a sound and consistent segregation system where you're segregating different duties with regard to check writing and cash functions within your company.
And we'll have to wrap it up there this time. We've got documentation as one of our other pillars, but you all have left us with a great set of resources that our folks can click through on the slides that they've downloaded. So thank you for those great reminders and the need to continue to communicate well.
Well, that was a fantastic session there. I think these quarterly segments on just best practices of risk management are important. Balancing out Dr. Johnson's opening session on demographics. So what we're going to do now is we got Rachel back. So we just got a couple of minutes here. Rachel, did you get an answer to the not-for-profit question?
Yep, I did get an answer. So not-for-profits are exempt from the beneficial ownership reporting requirements. So not-for-profits don't have to worry about it. It's just those small businesses with under 20 employees or under 5 million of annual gross revenue.
And Eric, on the July 13th town hall, Melanie Lauritsen joined us and did a deep dive into a lot of those BOI details. So if you didn't catch that one, I'd highly recommend that you go back and walk through that town hall.
Well, maybe just so we've got lots of questions. I don't know if there's a final tip that you want to provide, Sarah or Stan, from your
Sarah
side.
has one.
Sure. Well, I know we said we'd save documentation for a later town hall, but so many of our claim defenses hinge on what's in the work papers, what is the documented communication with the client. So all of these great communications that we have with clients are fantastic, but if they're oral, make sure you follow it up with in written documentation, especially those items related to ERC, weaknesses in anti-fraud controls that Stan and I mentioned, because that piece of documentation can really help thwart a claim if something arises down the road.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, Eric, is Sarah and I have worked together a long time, because that was going to be my last tip as well. So it's good foreshadowing for the next section, which will be, I think, on documentation. So.
Well, thank you all very much. We always end at 4, and we got 2 minutes left. So thank you, Dr. Johnson. Thank you, Rachel, Stan, and Lisa and I will close out today's show. So here's your in summary. Lot covered today. Please do leverage these slides. We moved past a few slides, Lisa, rather fast. Download the deck, and a lot of valuable information here. So we've got a couple of different resources here we just want to make you aware of. 6 HR tips for keeping up with today's talent transformation. That's coming up September 26th. A symposium on accounting pipeline diversity. And then we've already mentioned, Dr. Johnson and others will be with us at Digital CPA. Lisa, is there anything you want to add to this?
No, we've got a ton more resources coming, and we'll make sure that we get you updated on a regular basis, because talent is really one of the main things that folks want to talk with me about.
So we do have another town hall coming up in August 24th. I will not be with you, Lisa, but you will be here, and you've got Michael Strami and Barry, and we've got Michael Faulkner, who was with us throughout the pandemic, coming back to give us some of his latest research, and also Lisa, the chair of PCPS.
Yeah, I'm excited that Arume Hayes is going to be joining us. She's been chairing PCPS for the last couple of years. Small firm practitioner who brings a lot of energy and insight, and is really helping drive the development of resources that we'll be offering to you soon.
Well, on that note, I hope you all do get a few days off in August. You're having a good summer. Thanks for being with us today. Lisa, we almost had a record attendance, definitely record attendance for August, well over 8,000 people with us. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for your questions and your engagement. and we look forward to being back with you soon.
Thank you for your participation. You can now subscribe to the AICPA Town Hall series on your favorite podcast platform, as well as watch archives on YouTube and AICPA TV. Tune in for live broadcasts Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time.